So today I just wanted to share something very personal that happened to me, but in the midst of what I want to share, the biggest takeaway that I want to give is to show the God that I serve. And that's what my purpose of sharing today is. So if you mind, I'd just like to say a quick prayer. So if you'd like to join me and just bow your heads as I pray. Our dear, kind, loving Heavenly Father, we just praise you for this Sabbath day. We thank you again that we could come and just worship you and fellowship together. And at this moment, Lord, I just pray that your Spirit fill this place, that you fill our hearts and minds with you, Lord, that we may know you more. And as we hear your words today, that we may know more of your goodness and more of your love and the God that you are. We thank you for all your many blessings. We thank you for your mercy and your grace. And we thank you for being our God. And we pray these things in Jesus' name. Amen. So I believe that there are different ways that God can speak to us or that God can reach us. So sometimes he uses people. He uses your friends, your family. He might even use strangers to come and give you a message, maybe give you some words of wisdom, or maybe even tell you something that you might not want to hear. I think God uses other people to reach us and help us understand things. He also uses things, situations, maybe animals. I've heard all these wonderful inspirational stories of how he's used dogs and cats to send a message or to reach people. So he uses other things, situations to give us a message. He also speaks to us. I think a lot of us can relate to this. He speaks to us quietly through our conscience, or he puts something on our minds. And I think this is one way that God speaks to me often, because he'll put something in my mind and I'll have this really great idea and I'll know that for sure it's from God, because I'll think, no, I'm not smart enough to think of this. I'm not smart enough to come up with this. So this is definitely a God thing. But I also think that God still speaks to us directly. And we see lots of examples of this in the Bible where God directly speaks to his servant. And I believe that God still does that to this day. And I have 4 distinct memories of God speaking to me directly in my life, where I've been able to hear his voice directly. So the first memory that I can remember of hearing God's voice was actually a few years ago, maybe about 10, 15 years ago now. And I was studying back then at Avondale, and I came home for a break, and my friends wanted to go, they wanted to catch up. So it was a summer's day, it was summer's break, and we were going to meet in St. Kilda. We were going to go to a restaurant in St. Kilda, and one of my friends had come to visit from the Philippines. So I said, I hadn't seen her for a while, so I said, okay, I'm going to pick you up so we have a bit of time to talk together before we meet everyone else. So we're in the car, we're talking, and we're having a really great time catching up. We're laughing, we're giggling, we're gossiping, we're saying all the things because we haven't seen each other for a long time. And we take this ride, and we're getting close to our destination. So if you know the St. Kilda area, there's a big intersection there. I think it's Fitzroy Street and Queen Street. So it's a very big intersection, and it's about 6 p.m. on a summer's day. So as you can imagine, it was still bright, the sun is up, people are jogging, everyone in that area is fit, they're wearing their running clothes, they're jogging around, there's people walking their dogs. It's really busy, and you wouldn't think that there's anything dangerous around that area. There's a lot of people out. So we're driving, and we get to this intersection, and I go to press the brake. We're about to stop, and then I hear this voice speaking to me, and it says in a loud, I hear it really loud, and it sounds really authoritative and urgent, and it says, lock the door. And the voice was so strong that I didn't even question it, because usually I think of something and I'm thinking, oh, is that really like in my mind? But it was so loud and it was so urgent and authoritative that I didn't even question it. I just pressed the central locking. And not even a second after pressing the central locking, so I pressed the central locking, a man comes on the side of the passenger side door and he starts trying to vigorously open the door. So where my friend is sitting, and he just had a crazy look in his eyes. He did not look like he was in his right mind. And he started trying to vigorously open the door, and he starts banging on the window and he starts swearing at us, and he's like, open the door. And he's trying to check all the other doors to see if he can open the door and get in our car. So my friend and I are looking at each other and we start screaming because we're like, oh, there's a crazy man outside and he's trying to get into our car. But luckily, the light didn't take long to turn green, and I slammed my foot down on the accelerator, and I was like, I don't care if I run over your toes. Like, I'm getting out of here. And I drove as fast as I could, and we drove away, and we get to our destination, and we're laughing because the adrenaline is pumping through. You know, we just had somebody trying to break into our car, and then we're laughing. But I take a moment because I realize, whoa, imagine if I didn't listen to that voice in my head, how different this situation would be right now. And then I thought, that was definitely God. That was definitely God telling me to lock the door. He just saved our lives just then. So the second time that I remember hearing God speak to me directly, I was actually sitting on the toilet, and I do a lot of thinking when I sit on the toilet. So I was sitting on the toilet, and there was this thing that I really wanted to happen, and it seemed like the universe was aligning, everything was fitting in well, everything was going well, and I was like, God, why haven't you let this thing happen to me yet? Why hasn't this worked out? Like, everything is so perfect. Like, everything seems like it's going according to your will. Why can't this happen now? And I was, as I was sitting there complaining and, kind of telling God what to do, I hear this voice in my head telling me to wait, that I needed to wait for this thing to happen. And when I heard that voice, I was thinking, yeah, you're right, I gotta wait. And I didn't know why I had to wait, but I heard God say wait. And it was only about a year or two later that I understood the reason of why I had to wait. And I'm so glad that I waited. And sometimes waiting is even harder than a direct answer, yes or no, because you have to trust the process, and trusting the process is hard. But it took a while, and I understood. So that was the second time that I remember hearing God speak to me directly. And the third time was actually in 2023. So at that time, I was working for the Seventh-day Adventist Union Conference. I was working at the conference office. I was working in the youth department. And part of my job was to organize big events. And we were in the midst of organizing Pathfinder Camporee. So if you can imagine, that's the biggest event that we run at the youth department. So we were expecting about 5,000-6,000 people to this event. So it was really busy. It's years of preparation. And it was only a few months away. And as I was doing the admin for that event, and so I had to do a lot of work on the computer. I had to do a lot of work contacting, organizing, and in the middle of the year, getting closer to Camporee, I started to have problems in my right eye. So at first it was getting a little bit blurry. It was a slow digression. And then one day, my right eye just became blind. I just lost sight. And when I looked, blood vessels had popped in my eye. So I couldn't see out of my right eye. And when I went to see the ophthalmologist, they said, you've got bleeding in your eye. I had to get a few treatments, some injections. So while that process was happening, after about a month later, I thought it was getting a little bit better. All out of nowhere, my left eye also decides it wants to pop its retina too. So then I had bleeding in my left eye. And there was a season for about 2 weeks where I couldn't see at all. I wasn't able to see because both my eyes were bleeding. And the ophthalmologist said that I had to have an operation. So when I went to see the specialist, they said, we'll need to do an operation to clean out your eyes, but we're not going to know if you're going to get your vision back or not. And then and if you do get your vision back, we're not sure how much vision you're going to get back until we are doing the surgery, because they don't know how much damage was in my eyes. So they said it was really hard because I don't know what the outcome is. I just had to wait until the surgery. So there was about 2 weeks where I just had to kind of sit at home because I couldn't really see where I was going. I couldn't really do anything. So I remember there was one day when I was sitting at home and I was sitting on the couch because everyone had left me. So I didn't know where I was, and I was sitting on the couch and my dog was next to me. And I started to talk to God, and because I was feeling a bit low, and I thought, God, is this really going to happen? Are you really going to keep me blind? Am I really not going to be able to see? And I thought, God, I'm working for you. I'm working for the church. I'm doing these things, and it's so hard to do my job. Like, even missing 2 days of work puts me so behind with all the things that I need to do. So I was saying, God, I always do everything that I can for you. I promised you that if I get asked to do something at church, that if I'm able to do it, I'll never say no. Or if somebody asks me to help them in some way, I'll always try my best to do that. I do work for you. How are you allowing this to happen to me? And as I was sitting there, I started to think, how am I able to do more work for you if I'm blind? How am I supposed to live my life if I'm blind? And as I sat there and I began to wallow in my sorrows and started to feel sorry for myself, because I was like, am I really going to be blind? I'm so young. Like, how am I supposed to live life and enjoy life? It started to make me get a little bit worried and a bit nervous and a bit scared. And as I was sitting there and I was contemplating what was about to happen, or that I didn't know how sure my future was, or what is going to be of me, I heard God speak to me, and he said these 4 words, and he said, I'll still use you. And when I heard those 4 words in my head, I had complete peace. And it wasn't peace from knowing that he's going to still use me because I'm going to get my sight back. It was actually the opposite. It was, I'll still use you no matter if you're able to see again or if you're never going to be able to see again. I'm going to use you in your way, and you're going to have fullness of life no matter what situation you're in. And I was able to understand that, yes, no matter what situation I'm in, God is going to use me. With God, I have life. That's what's important. So I'm very thankful that I was able to go through the surgeries and get my sight back. So I was able to get my sight back, and then it's improved a lot. But it was that unsurety and God speaking to me that gave me that lesson to know I just have to trust God no matter what situation I'm in. So the last time that I was able to hear God speak to me was in March of 2024, while I was being rolled into an operating room for emergency surgery. It was actually in February 2024 that I went to California for a holiday with my sister. So I was still working at the union, but for a few months, well, actually it was for a few years, but a few months before that, I had really felt a pull in my heart to go back to study. So I had been studying theology, but I deferred it. And then after deferring it for a few years, I became really lazy and I didn't want to go back. But I kept feeling this pull to go back and study. You need to go back and study. And a few months for this time, I really felt it was just really playing on my mind. So I decided, okay, just before the school semester starts, I'm going to resign from my work and go back to study full time because I don't want any distractions. So I had a few weeks before I would start classes. So we decided, my sister and I, to go to California to visit our cousin. We have family there and she's like a sister and she was turning 40. So we said, what a better present to give her than our presents. So we went over to California and we just went there to spend some time. It was only supposed to be 3 weeks, but a week before we were meant to come back, my cousin was saying, oh, can you please extend your stay for a little bit longer? So I said, okay, I think I can extend it for another 3 weeks. So I extended my stay for another 3 weeks. So my sister went home and I stayed for another 3 weeks. And just a side note, when I redid my flight, I forgot to extend my travel insurance. So just a reminder, never forget your travel insurance. And I've been able to travel a lot. And I do admit there's a lot of times I didn't pay for my travel insurance. But this time I had it and I forgot to extend it. So we were there. We weren't doing a lot. We weren't doing a lot over there. We were just kind of at home, spending time with each other. We weren't doing anything extreme. So I thought, I don't really need travel insurance anyway. I'm not really going and doing anything exciting. I'm just at home, so we'll be fine. So we were enjoying the time together. And then I remember it was just a week before I was meant to go back home. And it was actually a Sabbath afternoon, and we were having lunch at one of our aunt's places. And it had been cold there. It was winter, but the weather was starting to warm up. And that day had been quite warm. And as I was sitting there, all of a sudden, I just felt this chill of cold pass through me. And my body just felt so cold. And then I just couldn't stop shivering. I was just shivering. And I remember actually thinking, oh, there must be a change of weather. Like, oh, I thought it was just about to get warmer, but it must be getting cold again. So I was shivering. And then later on that night, I had a fever. And I thought, oh, great, I've got COVID, because COVID was going around at that time. And I thought, oh, well, COVID, it might last a week and I should be good to fly home in about a week. But little did I know that 3 days had passed and I still had the fever and I still had the chills and it was worse. But I kept sleeping. I kept sleeping it off. I thought I just had to sleep it off. And I didn't realize that 3 days had passed and I hadn't eaten anything and I had hardly been able to even drink anything. I had just been sleeping. And so my cousin came in one day, it was a Tuesday now, and she came in to see me and she said, I think we should go to the doctor. We should go to emergency. And I said, no, I don't want to. I'm fine. I've just got COVID. I just need to sleep it off. And actually, by the Tuesday, I had also developed pain on my foot. And even though it doesn't look like it right now, I was actually going to the gym at that time. So I had been going to the gym, and the last gym session that I had before feeling sick was I did leg day. So I thought, I've got COVID and I must have strained my muscle or strained a ligament in my foot while I was carrying the weights at the gym. So I thought, great, I've got COVID and I strained my foot. And so my cousin was telling me, come on, I think we better go to emergency. And I was saying, no, I don't want to go. I don't want to pay this money to the American government, and then they're just going to tell me that I had COVID. But also in the back of my head, I was like, the American medical system is a ripoff, and they're going to make me pay for so much, and I want to spend more money buying clothes, because in America, there's a lot of good shopping. So I was like, no, I don't want to waste money on medical expenses. I want to buy more things before I get to leave. So she actually said, okay, I'm going to go to the gym, and I'm going to come back in an hour and see how you're doing. And luckily, my aunt, who was also visiting from Australia, she couldn't get a hold of me for 3 days. So she came to the house to see me while my cousin was at the gym. And she took one look at me and she said, get up, we're going to emergency. And I couldn't even get up. I actually couldn't even get up. So luckily they had a wheelchair and they carried me onto the wheelchair and they brought me over to urgent care. And we get to urgent care and I think, it's so full. I look around and the whole place is full. And I think, great, I'm going to be waiting here for hours and I feel horrible. And then they're just going to tell me that I have COVID and I have a strain on my foot. You know, this is going to be such a bad day. But to my surprise, I went into triage and it only took about 20 minutes for a doctor to come and refer me to get a CT scan on my foot and then come and see me. And so they bring me into the room and the doctor says, we're just waiting on the surgery team at the main hospital at Loma Linda University Hospital to give us the go-ahead to see if we need to get you into the main hospital. And I was like, what? I thought, what surgery team? It's like, how bad did I strain my foot? I must have tore something, or maybe I broke or fractured a bone. Like was I that clumsy? So we waited another 10 minutes and then they call me in and they say, yep, we're going to need to bring you over to the main hospital at the Loma Linda University Hospital. So they put me in the ambulance for a 2-minute ride over across the road to the hospital. And they wheel me into emergency and it's full, it's packed. But they wheel me straight into an isolated room. And they put me in this isolated room, and it's the first time that in this whole situation that I looked around and it kind of clicked to me that, oh, this must be something a little bit more serious. Why have they put me in the isolated room? So I'm sitting there with my cousin waiting, and then this team of 5 surgeons walk in the room, and the head surgeon is this little Asian lady, and she was small and tiny, but she looked really fierce. And she comes in and she looks at me and she says, look, I'm just going to give you this news straight. And I was like, yeah, give it to me straight. And she says, you have necrotizing fasciitis in your right foot, which is a flesh-eating bacteria. And she says, we're going to need to go to do an emergency amputation to save your life. And her exact words to me were, it's life over limb at this point. And I remember her saying these things to me, and I was kind of looking at her, and it just went in one ear and went out the other ear, because I was like, huh? How did my COVID and strained foot become necrotizing fasciitis? Like, I was literally at home doing nothing the last few weeks. What on earth is happening? And so I was kind of just looking at her, and she says, you know, it's really urgent. We're going to need to bring you in for surgery within the hour. So we're prepping the surgery room. So we're going to give you an hour. So she said, just take this time to call your family in Australia and let them know what's happening. And then we'll be back to check on you, but you'll be in surgery. You'll be in the surgery room within an hour. So I was like, okay. And I look at my cousin, and my cousin says, let's call your family. So we call my mum and dad and my sister, and we let them know what's happening. And my mum, she is a very worrisome person. If anyone knows her, she's always worried about, have you eaten, or did you bring your jacket outside? Make sure you do this. She's that kind of person. So I was really afraid to tell her what was going to happen, because she was actually telling me, like, don't stay in America too long because it's dangerous there. And then I was thinking, oh, she's really going to give it to me now because of what's happening. But when I told her, she was really calm, and I was so surprised. She was really calm, and she was like, it's okay, we're praying for you. Just trust God. And so it was more assurance for me. But it was actually my younger sister. Both my parents and my sister are also in the medical field. And it was my younger sister who started crying. And when she heard the news, she was just screaming and crying really loud. And she was crying over the phone. And then my cousin, who was next to me, she's a really strong lady. She's actually a director of a department in Loma Linda. It's the ECMO department, which is a really, really, if anyone has any medical background, it's a department where it's almost the last point that you have for your life. So it's almost a life-saving procedure. So it's they use a machine to keep your lungs breathing. So she sees a lot of trauma. She sees a lot of pain. She sees a lot of death. So she's one of the strongest people I know. And when my sister started crying, I can then hear my cousin starting to cry. And I thought, what? Great, she's crying. So I can hear my sister crying loudly over the phone, and I look over to my cousin and I see her there sitting and crying, and I'm listening to my sister and I'm looking at my cousin, and then I think to myself, wait, should I be crying? I think I should be crying. I feel sorry for these two. So then I start crying, but I think I started crying because I felt sorry for my sister and my cousin because they seemed so sad. And then as we were sitting there crying, the surgeons came in, and the surgeon says, I'm just going to have a look at your foot as a checkup. And she looks at my foot and she says, oh no, there's this red mark on your foot. So actually, when I got into urgent care, I had no marks on my foot. It wasn't even very swollen. That's why I never thought that there was anything wrong. I thought I must have just torn a ligament. But by that 30 minutes of me having the checkup, being brought into emergency, a gray and red had formed on my foot. It looked like it was rotten within that time. So she said, this infection is moving so aggressively. We don't have the rest of the hour. We need to bring you into surgery now. And I was like, wait, what? And she goes, no, we don't have time. We need to get you in now. So they said, like, we got to prep you and wheel you in. And within a minute, they had everything on the hospital bed, and they started wheeling me into surgery. And this is the part that I really remember so clearly, because it was so surreal to me, this moment, because I watch a lot of medical shows. So if anyone ever watches Grey's Anatomy or New Amsterdam, and ER even before, I used to watch a lot of those shows. And in these shows, they always have a part where someone is going to go into a life-threatening surgery, and then they're being wheeled into the operating room, and then the floodlights on the hospital roof are passing them by. And as they watch these lights pass by, they contemplate life. There's always a scene like that. And I remember this moment of being wheeled into the operating room, because I was having this moment for myself. And I was thinking, how is this happening to me? This is what I see in the movies. And as I was watching the floodlights pass me one by one, I started contemplating and going through these thoughts in my head. And it was like I was going through the 5 stages of grief within the 10 minutes of being wheeled into the operating room. And I remember that my first thought was, God, are you really about to let this happen? Am I really going to go into the operating room and my leg is going to be chopped off? Like my leg is really going to be chopped off? I was thinking, God, how is this happening? And then I started to question God, and I was like, what have I done for this to happen? And then I thought, I had this burst of energy for a moment. And then I thought, no, wait. I believe in a God of miracles. I believe in a mighty God, a good God. He is a God that makes all things possible. So I was like, God, you know what? I know you can make a miracle in me. I know that you can fix my leg. And I was like, God, let's do this together. And I was thinking, God, fix my leg right now, Lord, that when they lift up the blankets, when the surgeon go to chop off my leg, they'll be like, wow, it's miraculously healed. Look, everything is gone. And I was like, God, I know that you are a God who is able to do this. I know that you are a God who is able to fix my leg. And I had this burst of energy, and I was kind of like almost thinking that this is going to happen. And then as I was thinking about it, and I could feel myself getting closer to the operating room and reality was starting to hit in, I was like, God, are you really going to let this happen? Are you really going to allow this to happen to me? I'm working for you, God. I work for the church. I resigned from my work to listen to your call and go back to study. And I don't want to do that, but I did it because you're calling me. And now you're going to allow them to chop off my leg. And I thought, God, you called me to do ministry. How am I supposed to go to all the world and speak and preach your word if I can't even walk? If I can't even walk around the world? And God, you're so silly. How could you allow this to happen to me? And as I was thinking about what was happening, I started to get really angry at God. And I was like, God, what have I done to you that you've allowed this to happen? Like, what has been so bad that I have this punishment? And I was starting to get really angry at God and really angry at the situation. And then as I was getting angry, I then realized, this is a really life-threatening surgery. It's not like a little small surgery like my eyes, or something small, but I was like, it's a major surgery. They're going to remove an appendage of my body. Or am I even going to be able to survive this surgery? Am I even going to live? Like, not let alone just have no leg, but am I going to live and survive this surgery? And I started to get really nervous, and my heart started pumping. I could feel myself sweating, and it was like, I was getting so nervous and so scared. And I was like, what is happening? And then I had thoughts of like, I'm going to die. I think I'm going to die. Like, I don't know what's happening. And as I was starting to panic and just starting to get really bad thoughts, I heard those 4 words again that I had heard exactly a year ago. And it was, I'll still use you. And church, as I entered those operating doors, I was in complete peace as I entered the operating room. And as they put the mask on to put me to sleep, the last thing that I remember was I was in complete peace because God reminded me of those 4 words, I'll still use you. And this time it was an assurance that I'll still use you because you're going to be alive. You're going to get through this. And I remembered how God had been there for me and worked for me and kept his promises in times past, so that I had no reason to doubt him when I heard those words again, that I'll still use you. So I don't know if you may have noticed already, but I'm walking with a limp. I didn't wear a dress today, so you can't see. So my leg was amputated. My right foot was amputated, and the surgery was successful. So I thank God for that. So I have a few pictures. It was actually still a very difficult procedure, actually, my cousin, because she was a director at the hospital, they allowed her to come into the surgery room with me for the surgery. And she was there, and she told me later on when I woke up that my body was shutting down so fast. The infection was affecting my organs, that it was shutting down my body, that even before they could start the surgery, they had to resuscitate me twice. I actually coded. I flatlined twice because my body was shutting down. And then later on, the surgeon actually said to me that if I had come into the emergency room even just an hour later than I probably would have died from sepsis, because the infection was so vigorous. It was so fast. And they said, like, you just really came at the right time, because my body was so affected by it. So I have a few pictures just to show. So this is just my eyes, so you could see. So this is the last operation before I had to, when I couldn't see these were my eyes. And this is a picture of when we arrived in America. So I didn't have a picture of an American sign, but to me, this is an epitome of what America is: junk. But I love it. I say that, but I ate a lot of junk food there. So here, this is just a week. This is just a week before I had my surgery. So we were in I forgot the name of the park again, but we were hiking and bouldering. And, you know, I used to look at that picture and think, oh, I was doing that a week before, but now I look at it and I think, like, I'm so thankful that I was able to do that a week before. And here's a picture. This is just before the surgery. So these were the markings on my foot, and there was none of that just before I got into the surgery, before I got into emergency. So within 30 minutes, all those markings were appeared on my foot. And then this is a picture. This is me right after the surgery. So I'm in ICU, and my cousin sent this to our cousin chat. So I was still unconscious, and she took a picture, mastering your emotions, because she knew my cousins would be sad. But I thought, you know, they're already making fun of me, and I'm not even awake yet. That's the story of my life. And this is a picture of, this is a day, sorry if anyone's crazy, this is a day after my surgery. So that's what it looked like. It was really big. And so it was a big journey. It was a long journey to get to where I am. It was a lot of difficult things, but even though there was a lot of trials and there was a lot of difficulties, every day that I was in the hospital, so I was actually there for a month. I think it was exactly a month, because the infection, even after the surgery, was still rampant. I was on 4 strong IV antibiotics, and they wanted to take me off it because it was so strong. So after a few days, they thought they would try to put me on oral antibiotics to try and take take me off some of the IV. And within 2 hours of taking me off just one of them, I developed huge blisters all over my body because the infection didn't want to leave. It was attacking all my body. So I had to get back onto the antibiotics. So it was taking really long for my body to adjust and for the infection to be taken away. But every day in the hospital, every day after my surgery, yes, there were difficult times, but I was able to see God's hand every day in the hospital. There were so many things, and I could spend hours saying them, but I don't want to keep you here for too long. There were so many stories, so many instances, so many people that every day I was just able to see God's hand in my life. I could see God with me that entire time, from the people that he brought, from the situations that he placed in my life. During my hospital stay, I could see that God was right by my side. And the nurses, it was a huge blessing to be at Loma Linda. It is an Adventist hospital, but a lot of the nurses aren't Adventist, actually. But I was able to make friends with a lot of the nurses, and I still speak to them. We're friends on social media to this day. And a lot of the physiotherapists and the other allied health staff, I was able to keep friends with because we would talk, and we built relationships, and that was something that pulled me through every day. There was so many times where I would wake up in the morning and I wouldn't be feeling good, and I'd kind of be like, oh, I feel sad today. And then the nurse would come in and just say, oh, can I pray with you? And that's all I needed to pick me up. And it's like God knew exactly what I needed. And Loma Linda was so good that actually we make a joke that it didn't feel like a hospital stay. It felt like we were in a hotel, because I was actually on the 15th floor, which is the highest floor in the hospital. And it's a private room. It was a really big room. I just had it all to myself. And the view out the windows, it's a full glass window wall. And then the view is out to LA. So you can just see all like the city, and you can see the lights, and you can see the people go by. You can see the helicopters come. They like fly right by my window. I'm pretty sure they saw me a few times doing weird things because the helicopter pad was right above me. But I was like, I'm so entertained. I didn't watch TV for a whole month or anything because it was just so entertaining. And they also, if you know me, I hate being alone. And they let my sister and my cousin sleep with me every night at the hospital. They even gave them a bed. They gave them a pull-out couch. They rolled it into the room, and they would sleep there with me every night. I would just had people there every day, and we would always joke around. We'd be laughing at night, and we'd always joke around like, oh, they're just giving us a free hotel stay. And even though it was such a difficult time, I appreciated that time because my cousins there, they moved to the US 20 years ago, but we grew up together, and we were able to just spend nights and days, just the four of us together, and it was like catching up. But it was in such a weird situation because somebody just had their leg chopped off, but then we were laughing and crying together, and it was like such a precious time. And I thought, well, if I didn't have this surgery, I wouldn't have had this time with them. We haven't been able to have this time. So there was just so many things where even though the situation was so difficult, God just continued to show his blessings. And that's a few of the rehab things that I was able to do at the hospital. So despite the horrible situation that I was in, every single day I just was able to see God's hand and God's mercy and his grace in everything. And yes, it was a hard time. Yes, I did experience pain and I did experience sadness, but I was able to experience as much joy and happiness equally because God just continued to show his hand over my life during that time. And I think one lesson that I really learned was that we have to allow God to show us his goodness and to show his faithfulness to us. Sometimes we expect God to just be good and faithful, and we're like, God, show us. But sometimes we don't allow him to, because we keep we put what we have ahead of him. So sometimes I think about it, as Christians, we think that when we give our lives to God and we have God in our lives, that everything is just going to be easy and dandy. We're just going to have, a great, easy life with God. Sometimes I hear this when somebody gets baptized and they're like, oh, this is an amazing choice you've made, which it is. And then they talk about all the good things, and they don't ever talk about that. Yes, this is the beginning of a great life with God, but it's also the beginning of when you're going to have trials, because the reality is that we live in a sinful world, and the Bible tells us that the wages of sin is yes. And Jesus tells his followers in John that in this world you will have troubles. And it means that as a follower of Jesus, we're bound to experience troubles. We're bound to experience pain. We're bound to experience sadness. But then Jesus goes on to say to his followers in John, he says, you're going to experience troubles, but you will have peace. And not only will you have peace, but be of good cheer, for I have overcome the world. Jesus has overcome our troubles, church. Jesus has overcome our pain. Jesus has already overcome our tears. And this means that we are able to overcome if we have Jesus. And the difference that we can have from somebody who experiences these troubles and then experiencing these troubles with Jesus is that when we go through these troubles, we have God. And whether we're on a high or on the mountaintop, enjoying life, being able to see all the blessings, being able to see what God has given and see his hand, when we're in the most joyous times, or whether we're in the lowest times, when we're in the bout of depression, when we're experiencing health issues, when we're in the valley, in the midst of the valley, we are able to have the assurance that God never leaves us, and that he doesn't forsake us, and that he promises to be our source of strength. He promises to be our peace that passes understanding. He promises to be our strong foundation, and he promises us that we can have joy in pain. And I remember that I used to think that the story of Job was a really unfair story. Here is a faithful man, and Satan says, I want to test his faith. I don't think that his faith can withstand trials. And Jesus says, all right, test him. And Job, he suffers so much. He loses his wealth. He's a wealthy man, and he loses his vast wealth, his house, his livestock. He loses his family. He's got 10 children, and he loses not just 1 or 2, but he loses 10 of his children. He loses his good standing, his reputation amongst his community, and that's a big thing. And then in the end, he loses his health. To top it all off, he loses his health. And yet, he still stays faithful. And I thought, this is so unfair. Why does a faithful man have to go through these trials to prove his faith? And it was only when I went through this experience that I contemplated and I thought about this story of Job, that I saw that not only was Job able to pull through all his trials because he had a faith, but it was because he knew the God that he believed in. He knew the God that he was able to put his faith in. And then because of that, he was able to praise God in his trials. He was able to continue to praise God even though he had lost his family, even though he had lost his livestock. He had lost everything, his health. He was able to continue to praise God. And then in his praise, surely he was able to experience joy in all the pain that he was feeling, because that's how you're able to get through. That's how you're able to praise, because happiness and joy is a result of your praise. And for me, I was able to understand Job's story and to understand also with my experience that the miracle for me wasn't that my foot was going to be saved, because while I was being wheeled into the operating room, that's what I thought God needed to do. That's the miracle that I thought God needed to give for me. But the miracle of the whole situation that I understood after wasn't that God saved my foot, but it was rather seeing God's hand over my life and experiencing him by my side at the hardest time of my trouble. And I think that experience trumps being able to keep my foot. And I would never, ever wish on anyone for anything like this, anything even similar like this to happen to them. But when I look back, I just am so thankful that I was able to have this experience, because I wasn't able to see, I wouldn't have been able to see and experience and know God the way that I do now if I hadn't gone through that experience. And sometimes I even forget that I have a prosthetic leg. Sometimes I try and do things and then I'm like, oh yeah, I can't do that. I can't bend my ankle. So I think, God helps us get through these things. We go through the trials, but God helps us get through it in the end. Church, we have a great and awesome God. And he gives us promises in the Bible. And the promises that he gives us are not just promises that we can read in the Bible and then, it's a nice proverb to remember. But these are promises that we can read and that we can actually claim for our own. And then these are a few that I wanted to share this morning. These are a few that would come to my mind often while I was in the hospital. So the first one is in Proverbs 3, verse 5-6. If you know it, you can read it with me. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths. Psalms 28, verse 7. The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge, my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold. And Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. And this one was a big one because a lot of people use this. But after my experience, I thought, no, it's not just something I'm going to say. It's something that I can really claim for myself. I can't just do some things, or I can't just do a little things. I can do all things with Christ who gives me strength. And this last one was something that I really appreciated and appreciated more because of my experience. And it really is something that encourages me now in my life. And it's found in 1 Thessalonians 5, verse 16-18. Rejoice always, pray continually, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is God's will for you in Christ Jesus. So not only do we praise because we're happy, but we praise because we're sad. And we can only do that if we know the God that we have faith in, if we know the God that we believe in. Because if we experience him and we know him in that way, no matter what circumstance, no matter what situation we're in, we're able to give him praise. And that is a beautiful thing. That is a beautiful thing to experience. Because church, the matter of fact is our trials, our tests that we go through builds our faith. So I just wanted to encourage each and every one today to seek God and to draw closer to him, to know him better, know him well, so that when we go through the trials, because if you are a follower of God, you're going to go through some trials. And as King Solomon puts it in the Bible, he says, as a finning pot for silver and a furnace for gold, so is pain to his praise. I'll read that again. As a finning pot for silver and a furnace for gold, so is pain to his praise. So our troubles, our trials, our tribulations, we are able to see God work the most in those times. And our faith should be built on nothing less than Jesus Christ.